Sam Darnold becomes a free agency today, and Aaron Jones decided to push the deadline. What does all of that mean here on the Locked On Vikings podcast?
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day every single day. I appreciate y'all so very much. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, and right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Today on the show, we have an interesting deadline that has come up here. It is February 17th, and that means that 4 contracts on the Vikings, and then it became 3, have a void date. That means their contract terminates, they become free agents, a bunch of dead cap hits the Vikings, and that's because those contracts were made with void years. So that brings up a bunch of questions. Those players, by the way, are Sam Darnold, Byron Murphy, and Stephon Gilmore, and it was Aaron Jones until he moved the thing. So what does that mean too? So we do this every year, and I wanted to, every year we have this episode. So now is, I think, a great time for it, which is the what in God's green earth is a void year? Why do you do it? What benefit does it offer you? And is it worth the cost of kicking the can down the road in debt and all that stuff? And I'm going to make that argument as well. And I think Sam Darnold's contract is actually a great example to explain this on. And so each of these contracts has a day in which it will automatically terminate. That's what it means when the contract voids. It has a clause in it that says, on this day, this thing self-destructs, and it's functionally going to be like the Vikings release the player, like he's getting cut, but it's automatically worked into the deal. But the contract does extend in a ghostly way into future years. There's no money promised for those years. There's no bonuses. There's no salary. There's no nothing to those years. They're $0 fake dummy years. And the reason to do that is because it changes the way that the payout structure happens, and it changes the way things count against the salary cap, and I'll explain that in a little bit. But you're not making any, weird, there's no delusions with the player about how long this contract is for. It voids this at this time. So when I say a void year, I'm talking about one of those dummy years that is not actually part of the contract, but is counted as part of the contract for the purposes of restructure and salary accounting. So the way that this works is contracts prorate. By the way, if you want a visual of this, a couple years ago, I did a video on my Patreon page, patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL. Everything on there is free to watch right now. And it is in the Football 201 section that explains just some normal cap stuff. There's bean counting in it. If you want a visual, that's there for you. And a little bit of the history of why these things work. But think about it this way. Let's say that you were let's make the numbers really easy. Let's say you were going to play for a team for 4 years and you're going to get $10 a year. I don't know why you agreed to that, but it's a simple number. We move on. So let's say that after 2 of those years, the team's like, yeah, we don't want to pay you anymore. We don't want to do this contract anymore. You're going to be a cap casualty. We're going to cut you. So you sat down to the table and you were like, I'm going to get $40. And you only ended up actually seeing 20 of it. That sucks. So the union doesn't like that. The NFLPA, they don't like that, right? And agents don't like that. So they will typically negotiate that you have to have some level of guarantees. You have to have some kind of commitment to me. If you're going to if you're going to agree to pay me $100 million to play football, you need to have some kind of assurance to me that I'm going to see whatever number of that, I'm satisfied with. And one of the ways for teams to maneuver around the salary cap while still satisfying that demand is with void years. So take Sam Darnold's contract, for example. Sam Darnold's contract is hilarious. It's ridiculous. He made, in total, $10 million. The contract is technically a 5-year deal that he will play for 1 year of it. I do believe that all the dates and timelines and stuff are about the same. They can still tag him. They can still do all that stuff. So don't freak out about timeline stuff. But the contract changes, and everything the Vikings still owe on that deal comes due. So this is the payout structure of the deal. In 2024, $3.75 million of that deal was like owed. With a couple more million in per game roster bonus, it all adds up to, yeah. So here's how Darnold's contract works out. In 2024, he is owed in base salary, just straight up like money that he makes, $2.5 million of that 10. Everything else is in weird money. There's some roster bonuses and workout bonuses and stuff for like showing up to camp and all that. He sees all that money. That's $1.25 million. So we got $3.75 million total in just like regular money that Sam Darnold makes. The rest of it is in a signing bonus. And signing bonuses prorate. What that means is that they divide evenly across the length of the contract. So since this is technically a 5-year deal, that remaining money, $6.25 million, is spread into fifths and only costs $1.25 a year for the next 5 years. Now, that's ridiculously abusable if things just stayed like that, and the league cannot allow you to do that. So when Sam Darnold's contract voids, which according to Over the Cap happens today, the rest of Sam Darnold's money comes due. He made $5 million of it this year. An easy half of it was this year. The other $5 million comes due. Now, for Sam Darnold himself, he saw all 10 of it already. So, in 2024, Sam Darnold cost the Vikings $5 million against the salary cap. Now that his contract has voided, as long as it's after June 1st, which it is until the league year turns over in March. So, as long as it voids after June 1st, the rest of that money, so the last remaining $5 million, will count against the Vikings 2025 salary cap. That's all it is. So they're just taking a $10 million deal and splitting it up into this year and next year. The math of it is ridiculous. That's for Rob Brzezinski to figure out. And to be honest, you don't even really need to have a grasp on it. You just need to understand it's going to cost $5 million this year and $5 million next year. And that's easier to deal with than $10 million right now. The cap's going to be higher next year, so next year's $5 million is going to have a smaller impact on the Vikings' ability to sign free agents and extend players, etc., than it did last year. If you paid it all off now, that's going to be harder than doing 5 and 5. That's basically all it is. The downside is, of course, kicking the can down the road is the phrase everybody uses. And I think as adults, our relationship to the idea of like loans and debt and, delaying payment, deferring payment is this really like anxiety inducing thing, but it makes a lot of sense. And the crucial thing here, really important to understand, is that this changes nothing for the player himself. Sam Darnold received that $6.25 million signing bonus, or I'll say access to it, because sometimes there's like payment plans and stuff, but he got all that money up front. And then he got the rest of it in like game checks and roster bonuses and stuff. So Sam Darnold has pocketed all $10 million by now. It's just that they haven't balanced that with the salary cap, which is what you care about anyways. I don't think you actually care about the way that like cash flow happens between the Vikings and their players, as long as everybody agrees. But the thing about void years is that players don't care about them. They don't change anything for the player. In fact, a lot of the times it's good for the player because they essentially get a salary advance for no reason other than the team needs to do some accounting crap. And you just get a bunch of money up front. Okay, yep, we're good with that. So players are happy with it. Teams are happy with it. The salary cap is kind of abused by it, but there's nobody like standing up for the cap. Like nobody's on the cap's side of this. So everybody's fine with it. And we move onward, and some of the best teams, all your favorite teams in the league, use this a lot, including the Super Bowl winners who probably use it the most, the Philadelphia Eagles. So I want to defend void years next against the people who really hate them. And then talk a little bit about some of the greater nuances of like when you do the void date, and what this could mean for Aaron Jones's chances of returning to the Vikings that they changed that date. So that'll all be next on Locked On Vikings. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout any game. So when an NBA game tips off, if you didn't quite get it, your bet in time, it's no worries. Just make the same bet live. The line's probably just about the same right off the bat. So you can always stay in the action, or you can wait till halftime and see if there's going to be a comeback or something like that. Whatever it is, use FanDuel's live betting features on their app. They've got you up to date with live scores and stats and freshly updating things. So you have all the tools right in front of you that you need. And the app is easy to use. And when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Moving on here with the Locked On Vikings podcast. Thank you so much for hanging out. Void years are a good idea. I'm going to say that right now. Get that out of the way, okay? This is the argument I'm going to present. That void years are smart, and you should use them a lot. And the crucial idea is that the NFL has a massive inflation problem. I probably shouldn't call it a problem. It's very good. It means the NFL is making a lot of money, and there's a lot more money going into the pool, and therefore the economics of things are way different than the economics of your budget. The argument I hear against this, and I've had this argument, especially on Twitter and, in YouTube comments and stuff over and over and over and over and over again for years. I've been a fan of doing void years, and I think we greatly underestimate how much void year tomfoolery you can do before it starts to really bite you. Even the Saints, if Derek Carr was worked out and, was worth the contract they gave him, probably would have been fine. But they made a bad signing there, but it wasn't about the money. It was about Derek Carr being a bad quarterback. And here's the way that I'm going to put this, right? Deferring payment good. Ask any investor if they would take a loan for $1 million that they could pay back at 0 interest a year later. Every single one of them would be like, oh my God, absolutely. Just give me $1 million in capital. I can make whatever money I make off of it, and then I give it back to you in a year. That's free money, right? That's holding $1 million for a year is valuable. And that's a really key idea to understand. And honestly, with anybody who's doing home investing or whatever, right? Holding money, liquid money for a while that you can then do stuff with is an opportunity to make money on it. If you're good at the stocks or whatever, right? So the problem is there does come a cost that's down the line. But if you're going to pay Sam Darnold $10 million and you can use void year crap to pay $5 million of it later, not only does that give you the opportunity to hold $5 million for a year, which is a valuable thing, but you also get to pay $5 million when it's a lower percentage of the cap. Again, let me just use easy numbers here, right? Let's say the cap is $100 and you're going to pay a contract that's $4, right? So you're going to pay one $4 contract over 1 year, but you get to divide it in the same way into 2 this time and 2 next time. Well, what if the cap this year is $100? What if the cap next year is $110? Well, this year, that $4 contract is 4% of the cap, right? Next year, that would be only 3.6% of the cap. So if I could pay it in 2 now, and then what would that be? 1.8% next year? I can take what would have been 4% of salary cap and actually turn it into 3.8% of salary cap. I've now just saved a 1/5% of salary cap. And when the salary cap is $300 million, that actually is enough money to get a year of a veteran minimum guy or something like that, right? And if you do it consistently with all of your deals, you can find a way to manufacture entire contracts worth of value just by moving money around. Now the bill does come due, but it gets easier to pay as the cap goes up. And so as long as you continue to expect the salary cap to go up, which the only year it didn't was 2021. And yeah, the Vikings had a cap problem then because they bet that the They bet against global pandemics. Okay, I'm not too mad at them for that. But as long as it continues to go up, you can get yourself into some really advantageous situations. And you just kind of have to put up with there being dead cap on your books. But that dead cap is worth it. Mostly because you're doing other void years to make up that space, right? And you just keep doing that iteratively over and over and over and over again until you accrue so much debt that everything collapses, which happens 15 years down the line and you're 3 GMs down the road. That's the other thing. Looking at the Eagles as an example, and the Vikings, honestly, I think the Eagles and Vikings both had done a lot of void yearing, a lot of dead cap. This year, especially for the Vikings, where they had both Kirk Cousins and Danielle Hunter, they had like 40 mil in dead cap between the two of those guys. And they still managed to have a really active free agency with both short and long-term deals. They still managed to get a Justin Jefferson extension and a Christian Darrisaw extension done. The Vikings did not behave like a team with money problems at all, even though they had the most dead cap from all that void yearing that Rick Spielman did. Through all those years, the chickens came home to roost, and it did not matter. Now, sure, you could say, well, if they had 40 more million, they could have even done more. And yes, of course. But whatever cost that is was so clearly worth being able to fix all the salary cap issues, extend all the players they wanted to extend throughout the entirety of the end of the Rick Spielman era. They got so much value for the low cost of a cap problem in 1 year that wasn't really that bad, and they went 14-3 in that year. That is what void years can be. Yeah, there will come a cost. You get a lot of value for a lot of years, and then once you have to deal with something a little bit. Okay. I think as adults, we have a weird relationship to debt. Not a weird. We have a fearful relationship to debt, right? I don't want to be in debt. When I spend money on a credit card, I know that I need to pay it off at the end of the month, or it's going to explode in interest, and I'm going to have to, ding on my credit score, and all these other problems that adults have to deal with, right? And so the idea of me taking out a loan, at best, is a risky thing to do. If I take out a $100,000 loan and I have to pay it back, within 10 years, that's a risky thing for me. I need to find a way to make $100,000 off of that. Otherwise, if out of the business I start with that or whatever, otherwise I'm going to be in debt to the bank and I'm going to be in a bunch of trouble. But you have to understand that by and large, if you're taking out a loan, for the most part, you're going to be paying that back with some kind of interest. So borrowing money for us as American people, for mostly American people, but I'm sure as European people too, or wherever you're from, borrowing money is like a net negative thing. If I take out a $100,000 loan, I'll probably end up with interest paying it back, $120,000, whatever the number is, whatever your percentage is and however fast you pay the loan back, right? With your mortgage or your car payment or whatever. I mean, with cars, you can end up paying twice the value of that car in interest. So borrowing money is seen like, don't do that, right? Don't borrow money. Don't irresponsibly borrow a bunch of money. Don't kick the can down the road. The more you kick your credit card debt can down the road, the more you're going to end up paying on that. And so I think we physically revile at the idea of kicking the can down the road, because in our finances, our personal lives, that's a bad idea. And it is, right? Pay off what you can pay off. Try to have as little debt as possible. There you go. There's the financial advice from a podcaster. Don't be in debt. But unless you really know what you're doing. But in the NFL, there is no interest. It's extraordinarily important. So if your credit card had no interest on it, wouldn't you delay the payments all the time? Wouldn't you? I'm not going to pay my credit card this month. What are you going to do? You're not going to charge me any extra, right? There's no late fees, no interest. And in fact, you expect to be making more money in 2 years? Yeah, I'll pay off my credit card in 2 years when I'm making more money. I'll do nothing now. You would totally do that. And you'd be dumb not to. That's my void year thing. But there's a practical application to this going on right now, with Aaron Jones moving his date back, Sam Darnold voiding out soon. And in fact, Byron Murphy and Stephon Gilmore also void out today. So we got to talk about what's actually happening to the Vikings right now. That'll be next on Locked On Vikings. Okay, so here's what's going on right now. Today, 3 players are voiding out. That means that their contract is automatically terminating and they're becoming free agents. That's Byron Murphy, Stephon Gilmore, and Sam Darnold. Nothing has happened with those guys, so that's that. Nothing is stopping them from just re-signing a new extension with the Vikings. I believe that once the void date passes, the dead cap is what it is. If Sam Darnold wants to sign with the Vikings, he's signing a new contract from scratch, and the dead cap, that extra $5 million, is no longer a part of it. So an extension that would have, like very conveniently, whatever signing bonus comes with that extension would have already prorated through 4 years of that void year deal, of that fake 5-year deal that he has. That doesn't happen anymore. It's just a $5 million block of dead cap that's on the Vikings 2025 cap. And if he wants to sign a new contract, it's like he's a free agent doing that, right? Now, as a free agent, I believe he can still be tagged. I think that the way that void years work, you still are technically like tag eligible because the tag window hasn't even opened yet. But as long as you aren't a player that is seen by the cap as under contract for many years, right? Like when I'm recording this, which is before Sam Darnold voids out, he's still on a 5-year deal. As fake as that 5-year deal is, you can't tag somebody who's on a 5-year deal. But once his contract has voided and he is that now, hitting free agency, then he can be tagged in the same way anybody else is, I believe. But you can correct me if I'm wrong there. It's a little bit murky on like how franchise tag interacts with void years, so I'm not like a 1,000,000% sure. But hey, we'll find out. Same thing with Stephon Gilmore and Byron Murphy. So Aaron Jones was going to be part of this group, but they moved his date back. So what does that tell us, right? Well, that tells us probably that Murphy, Gilmore, and Darnold are gone. And I think none of that is too surprising. I would love to see Byron Murphy back, and the door is probably open, but it means that they're going to be able to test free agency, to call around, to see what happens. If they want to come back, if the Vikings have a deal that they like and they don't like their market, and they do, we would all be thrilled about that, but they're going to test the market. Usually test the market means they don't end up coming back, and they usually only test the market because they know that the market they're going to get is better than what the Vikings have already told them. Right? I'm going to guess that everybody's agent has some idea of the contract the Vikings are willing to give them, whether it's a concrete offer or just a ballpark. I'm going to guess everybody's agent has a vibe, and they probably have a vibe for what other teams have out on the market just by either, agents who have negotiated similar deals for other clients of theirs, or just straight up tampering, because that is just happening. You could just ask someone, hey, what would you give for Sam Darnold Raiders? And just get an answer that's like, I don't know, somewhere in this range. But with the way that the Vikings have been talking about Sam Darnold, it has been pretty clear that they were going to let him walk to me. That seemed to be the thing that they were sort of hinting at. And with Stephon Gilmore, hadn't really heard anything about that, but that always felt like it was just going to be a 1-year rental, at least to my instincts. And then with Byron Murphy, I actually thought he was going to come back, but we did get that report from Jeremy Fowler that the sense in the building was that he was going to walk too. So we've learned all of that before. That's not news. But with Aaron Jones, they are trying to get something done. So there is a bit of a prioritization game that happens here when it comes to the timeline of extending your players, because it takes time. And you can't do the Aaron Jones thing until you know what the Cam Bynum thing is going to cost you. So if they're going to re-sign Cam Bynum, whose contract is just normally expiring when the league year turns over, like everybody's does, when that means that they've got some time to talk to him, to negotiate with him. And if they're trying to get something done with him, which it has been reported that they are, they kind of need that answer before they can know what sort of offer they get to extend to Aaron Jones, because they just have to know how that puzzle comes together, right? So what it tells me is they are going to make some kind of offer to Aaron Jones. That could be completely unserious and Aaron Jones laughs at it and walks out the room. It could be something that he takes absolutely. It could be something that he says, hey, hold on to that. Let me test the market, see what everybody else says, and then I'll get back to you. And so all I'm learning is that, but that doesn't tell you a result, really. Like, that doesn't tell you, oh, he's coming back. It just tells me that there's maybe a little interest, but we'll see if they're on the same page about it. So still very much an up in the air thing, but it does tell you that whatever they're going to offer, They're waiting for other information to do so. I don't think it's the kind of thing where like, oh, they just didn't have time to get around to writing up the contract or whatever. Like these agents can draft up a contract. They've got everything templatized. They can draft up a contract at the drop of a hat. If the situation needs to move quickly. And sometimes it does. Like sometimes in free agency, it isn't all that everything got. I mean, sometimes these deals get signed, 10 minutes into free agencies. Okay, well, that was just somebody just tampered. But the contracts that get agreed to, in the tampering window, sometimes they are, hey, things opened and I got a call on the first 10 minutes of the tampering window and we drafted up a contract in 48 hours. You can do that. So needing more time isn't about that. And I think sometimes we go, well, what's the front office even doing? Why do they need a deadline extension? Well, it's because they're waiting on other information. And they're trying to give that information like time to work out. So now Aaron Jones's contract date has pushed back. Harrison Smith's contract date, his is weird. His happens actually in the middle of free agency. So that'll be like a news item there. Whatever happens there, it'll be some kind of news item we talk about in the middle of the flurry. But for those other three players, Darnold, Gilmore, and Murphy, they leave. And for all intents and purposes, they become free agents. And that's that. So there's your answer about the McCarthy thing, I guess, buried in the back of the show. Like it kind of happens today, assuming Over the Cap's contract reporting is correct, which sometimes on those dates, it can get a little bit nebulous and murky. I don't know. Sometimes we operate on assumptions. So don't take my word to the bank quite yet, but I would expect that there's going to be some kind of headline about these players today. So, if you have other questions about this stuff, please shoot them to me. You can send them to me via email at lockedonvikingspodcast@gmail.com. If I don't respond directly to you, I'll answer on the show. You can also find a Google form in the show notes that you can ask me questions at. In the description to any episode of this podcast, you can find there, or you can hit me on Blue Sky at Luke Braun NFL. I will see you all for Twitter Tuesday tomorrow. Not Twitter. Timeline Tuesday tomorrow. Breaking years long habits. Okay, bear with me. I'll see you all for that, and as always, Skull.